Pol Pot in 22 minutes. Dive deep with us into the enigmatic life of Pol Pot, the face behind Cambodia's tumultuous history. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more intriguing tales from history. Born as Saloth Sar in the quaint village of Prek Spav, northeast Cambodia, Pol Pot's life and career is shrouded in mystery, including his exact birth date. Was it May 19, 1925, or was it May 25, 1928? But whatever the date, what's undeniable is the influence of his prosperous upbringing on his later ideologies. Son of Sok Nem and Saloth Pek, a wealthy farmer with extensive connections to the royal family, Pol Pot hailed from a prominent family that owned vast stretches of rice paddies and cattle. Cambodia's rich tapestry includes its reign as the formidable Khmer Empire, which made the city of Angkor buzz with almost 1 million souls. However, by the time Pol Pot was born, Cambodia was under the French protectorate. The French rule saw its population skyrocket, but it wasn't all roses. The increasing Cambodian numbers bore witness to an evolving socio-political landscape, including the weakening French colonial grip and an invasion by the neighboring Kingdom of Thailand. Pol Pot's younger years were fascinating. A novice monk in 1934, he imbibed Buddhist teachings at Wat Botam in Phnom Penh. Then he traded monk robes for school uniforms, attending a Roman Catholic primary school. Not particularly shining in academics, he had a penchant for sports which saw him graduate late. Yet thanks to his privileged connections, he enjoyed royal patronage at a prestigious boarding school. While Pol Pot was busy with sports and studies, outside, the world was shifting. The onset of the Second World War in 1939 saw French colonial rule waver, leading to Thailand invading Cambodia. This period also marked a significant chapter when an 18-year-old King Sihanouk ascended the throne. Initially seen as a puppet, Sihanouk defied expectations, shaping Cambodia's politics for decades. Amidst all these, Cambodia experienced the weight of Japanese occupation during the Second World War. By 1945, as the war concluded, Sihanouk declared Cambodia independent, but French colonial rule resumed soon after. Pol Pot's early life defied expectations. Rather than pursue a typical career for someone of his elite status, he initially enrolled in a carpentry course. This didn't last long, as his familial privilege granted him a scholarship to a Parisian engineering school in 1949. Paris during this time was a hotbed for political radicalism. Instead of adopting pro-French sentiments, Pol Pot was drawn to the political dynamics of post-war Cambodia, becoming critical of French colonial rule. King Sihanouk was making progress with the French for Cambodia's autonomy, but many felt it wasn't enough. With the backdrop of the First Indochina War involving Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia, French authorities were more inclined to offer concessions to Cambodia. Upon Pol Pot's arrival in Paris, he delved into the Cambodian political scene there. Joining groups like the Khmer Student Association, he became acquainted with communist ideologies. However, Pol Pot's alignment with communism was more pragmatic than ideological. Many post-Second World War anti-colonial movements leaned towards communism, primarily for the support they could receive from major communist powers. Pol Pot himself admitted to a superficial understanding of Marx's writings. Instead, he was more drawn to the relentless pursuit of revolution, with scant regard for its consequences, rather than a true allegiance to communism. Pol Pot spent 3 years in Paris, immersing himself in politics. As the political situation in Cambodia escalated in 1953, King Sihanouk disbanded the National Assembly and took autocratic control, plunging the nation towards a civil war. In light of this, the Sesi Marxist in Paris in late 1952 decided to send Pol Pot back to Cambodia to assess the situation. Upon his return, he witnessed King Sihanouk's call for independence from France in the summer of 1953, a request that was honored by November. While independence was achieved, the future of Cambodia remained uncertain. The ensuing 15 years in Cambodia were tumultuous, culminating in a civil war in 1968. Meanwhile, the Geneva Conference of 1954 ended the First Indochina War between the French and Vietnamese seeking independence, but peace in Southeast Asia remained elusive. The region split, with North Vietnam leaning towards communism and South Vietnam towards the West. This divergence led to the onset of the Vietnam War in 1955, which persisted for 2 decades. As the Vietnam War raged on, Cambodia was embroiled in the turmoil. The Viet Cong troops from North Vietnam used Cambodia as a base for their operations in South Vietnam. Meanwhile, radical Marxists in Cambodia, including Pol Pot, looked to North Vietnam for support in sparking a revolution at home. By the 1950s, after gaining independence, Pol Pot was actively seeking political change in Cambodia. In 1955, the first post-independence elections in Cambodia surprised many when the expected victors, the anti-monarchy Democratic Party, did not come to power. Instead, King Sihanouk had a strategy up his sleeve. Before the elections, he abdicated in favor of his father Norodom and then swiftly created his own political party, Sangkum Riasta Nayam, or the Community of the Common People, through tactics that included widespread voter intimidation and fraud. Sihanouk's party garnered over 80% of the vote, making Cambodia effectively a one-party dictatorship with Sihanouk as the prime minister. Pol Pot, a prominent Marxist-Leninist figure, found himself and his allies marginalized, forced to operate covertly due to Sihanouk's oppressive reign. Pol Pot took up a teaching job in Phnom Penh and married Khieu Ponri in 1956. Yet, political repression intensified, with leading members of the Democratic Party facing public abuse and physical harm, particularly during an official debate in 1957. Nevertheless, by the end of the 1950s, the political landscape began to shift. In 1959, the seeds of what would later morph into the notorious Khmer Rouge were sown. That year, the Cambodian Labour Party was founded. Not long after, 21 party leaders, including Pol Pot, convened in a Phnom Penh railway station, deciding to rebrand the party as the Workers' Party of Kampuchea. While two Samata Nuonchea assumed top roles, Pol Pot was positioned third in command, poised for future leadership. In the 1960s, as a fervent Cambodian nationalist, Pol Pot grew his opposition to Sihanouk's regime, mainly in the northern and eastern regions of Cambodia. His significance in the Workers' Party of Kampuchea became pronounced when he was chosen as the leader following Tu Samut's assassination by the Cambodian government. This death reflected the broader suppression of Cambodia's socialist movement. Before Pol Pot could officially lead the Workers' Party, he had to escape with his wife to a Viet Cong camp near the Cambodia-South Vietnam border, marking the onset of an impending civil war. Pol Pot's following years were spent hidden in the Cambodian and Vietnamese jungles. It was here that his dictatorial persona solidified, while he maintained an aura of mystique with noticeable self-control. Those around him recognized his potential for charm. This allowed him to engage with diverse individuals. Yet beneath this seemingly pleasant exterior lurked a man thirsty for power, inherently violent and growingly paranoid. His personal life was tumultuous. His wife's mental health declined in the 1960s, leading to her diagnosis of schizophrenia in the 1970s. They divorced in 1979. Pol Pot later remarried but had limited family engagements, only fathering one daughter in the mid-1980s. His own health was marred by insomnia and intestinal problems, further intensifying his unpredictable nature. Amidst these jungle years, the Cambodian communist movement expanded. As Sihanouk's suppressive reign alienated more citizens, they turned to the forests, aligning their revolutionary ideas under a unified cause. The Workers' Party was renamed the Communist Party of Kampuchea of the Southwest in 1966. In Phnom Penh, Sihanouk began referring to its members as the Khmer Rouge or Red Cambodians. Although the term was initially rejected by Pol Pot and his followers, it became widely accepted and is now synonymous with the terror of his regime. The Cambodian Civil War started in January 1968 with Khmer Rouge insurgents led by Pol Pot, attacking an army base south of Battambang. At that time, Sihanouk was in charge of Cambodia and responded to the insurgency with a violent crackdown, which included bombing the northern and eastern parts of the country. These actions drove many Cambodians to support the Khmer Rouge. By the late 1960s, Pol Pot, formerly known as Saloth Sar, became the prominent leader of the revolt. The civil war's trajectory changed with Cambodia's involvement in the Vietnam War. In 1969, President Nixon initiated bombing raids in Cambodia to disrupt Viet Cong operations. Then, in 1970, a pro-American coup overthrew Sihanouk's government, and the Khmer Republic was founded with Prime Minister Lon Nol at the helm. Sihanouk left Cambodia, but remained politically influential. Despite Nol's orders, the Viet Cong, allied with the Khmer Rouge, gained control over significant parts of Cambodia. The war's focus shifted from toppling Sihanouk's regime to a battle between the Khmer Rouge and Lon Nol's Khmer Republic. Backed by international powers, this conflict would last 5 tumultuous years. Pol Pot, as a fervent Cambodian nationalist, viewed the civil war as a path to independence from French colonialism and the reigning monarchy. During the mid-1960s, understanding that most Cambodians were farmers, his party realized that a Marxist-Leninist revolution in Cambodia would predominantly involve the rural peasantry, who were impoverished by the French and the monarchy. By 1967, his forces grew in the jungles poised against Sihanouk's regime. The civil war escalated in 1968 following an attack on an army base, and as Sihanouk retaliated, support for Pol Pot's cause surged among rural Cambodians. As the 1970s dawned, his ranks swelled with pro-Moni rebels. The party developed a structured bureaucracy and government system in anticipation of capturing Phnom Penh. The United States' waning involvement in Vietnam reduced its support for the Lon Nol government in Phnom Penh. Bombing raids halted by 1972, giving Pol Pot a strategic advantage. Despite a ceasefire declared by Lon Nol in January 1973, Pol Pot's forces pressed on. By April, they were on Phnom Penh's periphery. Although US intervention initially stalled their advances, Lon Nol's regime, losing popular support, soon found itself cornered in the city. In March 1975, in alliance with the Viet Cong, Pol Pot's army, consisting of nearly 400,000 soldiers, encircled Phnom Penh. The city capitulated on 17 April 1975, concluding the Cambodian Civil War. Saigon fell to the Viet Cong merely 13 days later. After the war, the once obscure Khmer Rouge emerged dominant. However, the subsequent rule of Pol Pot's Communist Workers' Party of Kampuchea unleashed unprecedented brutality on Cambodia. This regime's atrocities are among the darkest chapters in human history. The Khmer Rouge, over a decade, cultivated their ideology in the jungles of northeast Cambodia. By the mid-1960s, they aimed to foster an agrarian revolution centering rural peasants in their communist vision. Interestingly, this perspective deviated considerably from traditional Marxist views. Urban workers were deemed threats by the Khmer Rouge, prompting a push for Cambodians to abandon cities in favor of an agrarian lifestyle. Upon capturing Phnom Penh in April 1975, Pol Pot entered the city, setting up his government at the Silver Pagoda, and briefly took up the mantle of Prime Minister. The initial balance of power in the new Cambodia was uncertain, with multiple regional military leaders holding significant influence. Nevertheless, the Communist Party eventually dominated, renaming the nation Democratic Kampuchea in January 1976. A committee of the Khmer Rouge's top members governed the country, addressing each other as brother. Pol Pot was distinguished as Brother Number 1. To deter resistance, former King Sihanouk was incorporated into the government. However, by spring 1976, he resigned and was subsequently confined, ensuring the Khmer Rouge's grip in the post-Civil War year. The policies set by Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge during the latter 1970s have gained notoriety. The regime's foundation was the vision of an agrarian upheaval, bolstered by a rural working class. Drawing inspiration from Chairman Mao's Great Leap Forward from 2 decades prior. They aimed to dramatically surge Cambodia's food and industrial outputs in a limited time frame. Undeterred by the massive loss of life during China's Great Leap Forward, Pol Pot aimed to dramatically bolster Cambodia's agricultural and manufacturing capacities, using similar methods. His primary ambition was to render Cambodia wholly self-reliant, independent from external support, especially from its influential neighbor to the east, Vietnam. Pol Pot's vision of Cambodian autonomy centered on collectivization. This involved the nationalization of farms across the country, with farmers then collectively managing these lands. The intent was a significant boost in agricultural yield by compelling Cambodians to work to their limits. To realize this vision, Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge initiated a mass migration from urban centers to labor camps in rural areas. These camps were notorious for their horrendous conditions, amounting to essentially forced labor. Inadequate food supplies, paired with demands for high production, led to widespread malnutrition and subsequent deaths. By 1976 and 1977, as conditions worsened, diseases became rampant, increasing the death toll. Non-compliant workers faced brutal punishments, including execution. Yet, the grim circumstances of these labor camps weren't the only arenas of tragedy in Pol Pot's Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge's rule was marked by intense autocracy, xenophobia, classism, and totalitarianism. Despite Pol Pot's own upper-middle-class upbringing, anyone with even distant ties to previous ruling elites or perceived bourgeois backgrounds was at risk of execution. Ethnic minorities, such as Cambodians of Chinese descent and Muslims, were heavily targeted, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands between 1975 and 1979. The state established itself as an atheistic regime, brutally suppressing Buddhism. Opposition was met with arrest and execution, with over 150 torture and execution centers across the country. The most notorious was S21, a former school where up to 20,000 prisoners were processed between 1976 and 1979. As time passed, paranoia permeated Cambodian society. In the late 1970s, the Cambodian genocide orchestrated by Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge resulted in the death of between 1.7 and 2 million of Cambodia's 8 million people. Pol Pot's regime was characterized by ideological brutality and the totalitarian nature of the Khmer Rouge. After capturing Phnom Penh in 1975, they executed thousands of educators, revealing a repressive stance on education. The health system deteriorated under Pol Pot, with many medical professionals executed due to their class. The economy was devastated. Currency was abandoned for bartering and foreign trade dwindled. Failed agricultural policies led to widespread famine. Internationally, Pol Pot sought Cambodia's self-sufficiency, preferring isolationism and distancing from Western powers, especially the US. He found allies in autocratic leaders like Nicolae Ceausescu of Romania, while favoring ties with China over the Soviet Union. Horrifically, the regime's violence even affected children, who were indoctrinated and sometimes forced into acts of murder. Offspring of dissenters or ethnic minorities were killed to thwart future revenge. Mass executions occurred in killing fields across Cambodia, where victims were brutally killed using primitive weapons to conserve ammunition. The sheer brutality of the Khmer Rouge remains a haunting chapter in history, a testament to the depths of human cruelty. After foreign powers intervened in Cambodia's affairs once more, the Vietnamese and their Cambodian allies were temporarily stopped by a sudden Chinese invasion of northern Vietnam in February 1979, despite the Sino-Vietnamese War being short-lived with a ceasefire in place by mid-March. This invasion provided the Khmer Rouge and other militant Cambodian factions an opportunity to reorganize their resistance against the Vietnamese-backed government in Phnom Penh. Taking advantage of this distraction, the Khmer Rouge, under Pol Pot's leadership, solidified control over regions in northwest Cambodia near the Thai border. With financial and military support from both China and the United States, Pol Pot aimed to rejuvenate the Khmer Rouge's image during the summer of 1979. This involved distancing the group from its past socialist ideologies. Pol Pot then sought to present himself as the head of a new coalition, called the Patriotic Democratic Front, which consisted of various political and military factions that stood against the Vietnamese-supported Phnom Penh administration. In a move to further reinvent his image, he shed his Pol Pot pseudonym, opting for Penh in honor of his father. Surprisingly, these strategic shifts gained him some international credibility. By November 1979, the United Nations even recognized the Khmer Rouge as the legitimate Cambodian government, sidelining the Phnom Penh administration. It's notable that even though the Khmer Rouge had been responsible for heinous crimes, the full scale of these atrocities was not yet globally recognized in 1979. By the end of that year, as the Cambodian-Vietnamese War commenced, Cambodia was plunged into what was effectively a new civil conflict. This war, reminiscent of the strife that initially empowered the Khmer Rouge in 1975, persisted for another decade. Throughout this period, the Khmer Rouge was but one of the many factions contesting the People's Republic of Kampuchea and Vietnam. Pol Pot saw the rise of various factions in Cambodia, most notably Phun Pech, established in 1981 by the influential former King Sihanouk. To counter this and garner support, Pol Pot dissolved the Communist Party in the same year, launching a new nationalist movement, showcasing his adaptable ideology. By the mid-1980s, as guerrilla skirmishes persisted in Cambodia's jungles and foothills, Pol Pot began to retreat from the movement's forefront. The dreaded reign of the Khmer Rouge concluded in the late 1990s. By the mid-80s, health concerns and challenges in the war against the Vietnamese prompted Pol Pot to step down as the Khmer Rouge's military chief. Diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma in 1983, he expressed no desire to reclaim power once the war ended, but wanted the Vietnamese out of Cambodia. With the Cold War nearing its end, Vietnam started pulling out its forces from Cambodia in 1988, completing the process by 1989. The Khmer Rouge's interests were represented by Pol Pot's close ally Khieu Samphan. National elections in 1993 saw the parties of Samphan and Hun Sen secure almost 80 of the votes. However, the Khmer Rouge's influence was waning, with their presence limited to a small border area with Thailand. Despite the Khmer Rouge's immense grip on Cambodia during the 1970s, it wasn't until 1999 that the party was finally defeated, bringing an end to its reign of terror. By the late 90s, the once powerful leadership had deteriorated into paranoia and internal disputes. In the dense forests of western Cambodia, Pol Pot found himself ousted in a party coup. In the summer of 1997, a rival faction led by Tay Mak placed Pol Pot and his family under house arrest. Pol Pot's health was already in decline. A heart condition, stroke-induced paralysis and untreated cancer plagued him. The irony was stark when the very party he had led for over 3 decades sentenced him to life in prison in July 1997. However, his life was already nearing its end. Pol Pot passed away on April 15, 1998. Some say he died peacefully in his sleep, while others speculate he took his own life to evade a US trial. 6 days later, his body was cremated in a Buddhist ceremony. So ended the life of one of the 20th century's most fearsome dictators. He left behind a nation scarred by landmines, a tumultuous history, and an authoritarian legacy. Indeed, Pol Pot stands as a haunting reminder of the monsters that once walked our world. If you found this dive into history intriguing, please give a like and subscribe for more compelling stories from the past.